The President's Press Conference from the new State Department Auditorium in Washington, D.C., July 5th, 1962.
I have two statements on two bills that are now before the Congress. I want to express my very strong support for the foreign aid bill, which the House leadership now expects to bring to the House of Representatives next week. Our foreign aid programs have made great demands on our people, and still do, but they are vital to our security and are carefully designed to respond to the national interests of the United States, as well as the maintenance of the peace and security of the free world. Three facts should be kept in mind. Almost half of the money authorized in the foreign aid bill is for military assistance or supporting funds for the defense of countries directly threatened by aggression or subversion. More than 80% of the money committed to economic assistance is in the form of loans, not grants. And these loans will have to meet our aid criteria and be repaid in dollars. More than 80% of the money appropriated for the foreign aid programs will be spent here in the United States on goods and services supplied by American businesses and American workers under new and tighter procedures which are being developed. Most importantly, we simply cannot stand aside in the face of the needs of developing countries. In Latin America, for example, it's more urgent than ever that the Alliance for Progress should go forward. Here is an area with an income per capita 1/8 of our own. In some of these countries, they're overwhelmingly dependent on a single export commodity, and they have to sell at wholesale and buy at retail. It's estimated that Latin America has 50 million underprivileged adults and 11 million children of school age who are not in school. The stirrings of revolutions can be felt in this hemisphere. It will either be peaceful or violent. We want it to be peaceful, but we have to do our part with our sister republic in assuring that. This is a bipartisan bill supported by my predecessors since 1945. I hope we can get favorable action this year. The second matter is to urge strong support for the Senate effort, which is now going forward under the leadership of Senator Anderson, to pass a medical care for the aged bill under Social Security. The bill which is now coming before the Senate is a strong bill. It meets the problems of those who have been not covered by Social Security. It provides participation by the Blue Cross, by private insurance companies. It's an effective bill, and I think could mean a good deal to our older citizens and their children who must sustain them. I hope the Senate will act, and then the House.
Mr. President, there seems to be growing sentiment in various sectors, both labor and business, for a tax cut this year. Have your discussions with Secretary Dillon this week opened the door at all to such action in 1960?
No, we're continuing to watch the economy. We have, as you know, planned a tax cut and tax reform to come next year. And we, of course, would prefer to maintain that schedule. We're continuing, however, to watch the basic indicators of the economy. And if we feel that the situation in the economy would warrant a tax cut, of course, then we would recommend it. At the present time, we are maintaining our previous schedule, but I think the recommendations of the Chamber of Commerce, which is, of course, intimately in touch with the business community, and also the recommendations of the AFL-CIO in regard to the need for a tax cut should be very seriously considered by the executive, as it is by me, and by the Congress, because representing as they do business and labor, giving their recommendations in favor of a tax cut, we have to take that judgment into very careful balance, which we are.
Mr. President, regarding your proposal for a Declaration of Interdependence and a concrete Atlantic alliance, can you give us any particulars on how these goals may be achieved? I'm thinking in terms of how long a period of time may be involved, and whether eventually this would be based on alliances or some form of political union.
Now, as I said yesterday, the first task is, of course, for Europe in its own way and according to its own decisions to complete its organization. When a decision is reached in regard to Great Britain's joining, which we hope this summer, then, of course, this work will move ahead at a more accelerated pace. What I was attempting to suggest yesterday was that any view in Europe, or any stories which might appear that we regard this strong and increasingly united Europe as a rival, were not true. We regard it as a partner. We regard it as a source of strength. It is true that when this united Europe develops, that of course its relationship with us will be different than it's been in the past. The NATO alliance was a series of independent countries. place special responsibilities upon the United States, which we were glad to assume, but which, of course, the relationship would be different between a single powerful Europe or a union of powerful European states and the United States. We would have to work together on economic matters. As you know, we have been carrying great burdens in many parts of the world. The dollar has, as well, military, economic, political, and I'm hopeful that when Europe has completed its work, that Europe and the United States can then attempt to complete and harmonize its relationship in a way that will benefit not merely the United States and Europe, but also, as I said yesterday, will look outward. We do not want this to be a rich man's club while the rest of the world gets poorer. We want the benefits of this kind of union to be shared. But the first task is Europe's, and then it will be Europe and the United States. Yes,
Mr. President, today you named a new Soviet ambassador. No doubt you've talked in general terms, or will talk in those terms with him about his mission. I wondered if you could discuss briefly, in a general way, your feelings about the relations with the Soviet Union since you've taken office and what you expect in the months ahead.
Well, in the case of our new ambassador, Mr. Kohler, I've worked very intimately with him for the last year and a half because he's been ahead of the so-called task force on Berlin and has participated in all the ambassadorial meetings, so that he goes to the Soviet Union with complete knowledge of the government's policy and also my complete confidence. We continue to attempt to work for an adjustment of those major tensions which disturb the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union and between the free world and the communist world. We have not always been as successful as we had hoped, but we are continuing. We're continuing the discussions over Berlin. We are now in conference in Geneva on Laos, where we are hopeful that a satisfactory treaty can be reached. We are going to be back in conference on July 16th on disarmament with the Soviet Union, so that we are continuing to see if it's possible to reach an accommodation for the peaceful use of space. In a whole variety of ways, we are attempting to lessen the chance of conflict with the Soviet Union and maintain our own security and the peace of the free world. That's the object of our policy. It cannot be accomplished quickly. It will require, I think, some time to come, but that's the object of our policy, and we are going to attempt to continue to live in peace with all countries, and particularly those countries whose military potential is such that any great conflict would involve the future of both of our countries and of the race. And Ambassador Kohler will attempt to carry out this policy, which I've stated necessarily in a most general way.
Mr. President, you say that the Atlantic Partnership would be an advance on what we now have. How would it better achieve those things you claimed for it yesterday in Philadelphia? That is, a greater deterrent to aggression, a banishment of war and coercion, and some of the other
Well, this
things.
will represent an extremely powerful body of people and productive power. The North Atlantic, North America and Europe, having nearly 400 or 500 million people, having a productive power which is enormous and steadily increasing, this represents a very vital source of strength. My concern is that the relationship between Europe, using it in the single sense, and the United States be intimate. We have been dealing, as I've said, with a great many countries, which are smaller than the United States. Now we're going to have not one country, but one great organization, if the effort is successful in Europe, and I'm hopeful that we can reach accommodations on the economic relations, trade, also the problem of currencies, and all the rest on the problem of military policy, and then that we can emphasize, which I suggested yesterday, that we look outward. We do not want a Europe, as I've said, and a United States to be a core of an increasingly disintegrating world. And therefore we're concerned about the admission of the raw materials of Europe, of Latin America to Europe. We're concerned about the Pacific community, the Philippines, Japan, and the others. And we are concerned that Europe and the United States play their proper role in assisting the underdeveloped world. These are statements of general policy. They must wait for more precise implementation while Europe completes its work. But I wanted to indicate yesterday how much we favor this, and we do regard it as a source of strength and satisfaction, and not a source of, not as a rival. Europe does not want to be dependent upon the United States. We do not want that relationship, and I think we meet as equals when this work is completed. Mr. Kenway?
Mr. President, two questions based on the passage of the Sugar Act and the foreign lobbying attending it. First, what do you think about the exercise by the House Agriculture Committee of what is essentially the power to make foreign policy by allocating quotas? And secondly, on the lobbying itself, do you believe there is involved a kind of double standard here? The executive is controlled by very strict rules on conflict of interest. Do you think something similar to this should be expected of congressmen?
Well, as you know, that the bill that we sent up to the Congress did not provide for this allocation of quotas. The final bill, which was passed by the Congress, which I've not yet signed, plus the amendments made today in the legislation before the Senate today, I think provide for an improvement over the situation as it was in the original House bill. Now, the second, though it isn't everything that the administration wished for, the second question is this matter of lobbying. I don't think it's a double standard. These men are all private people. They're not government people. So that I wouldn't say it's a double standard, but I think it's an unfortunate situation where men are paid large fees by foreign governments to secure quotas, and where in some cases there are contingency fees. For every ton of sugar they get allocated to their country, they secure a payment of so much. Well, now that is not satisfactory. I understand that appropriate committees of the Congress may look into the matter, and I think the fact that so much publicity has been given to this may serve as a deterrent. As you know, the bill which has passed the House and Senate, combined with today's bill, provides for a gradual phasing down of these quotas, and we'll have less of it. And I think we ought to have less of it.
Yes. Mr. President, I think Mr. Shoemaker's question included a question about whether this Atlantic Partnership would be a political union. Could you elaborate on that?
No, I would think that in a sense we have a political union. It depends how you define political. We have in the NATO alliance the obligations we've accepted under the NATO alliance, the North Atlantic Council, OECD, DAG, and all the other organizations which have been set up represent political commitments. And of course these political commitments will perhaps take a different form as Europe changes its form, and I hope a more intimate one. But as I've said, the first task is Europe's, and it will not be accomplished overnight any more than, of course, a length of time elapsed between the Declaration and our own Constitution. Yes, Mr.
President, what do you think of the propriety of the Reverend Martin Luther King intervening privately with the chairman of the Home Loan Bank Board in a controversial case pending before that agency?
Yes, I understood that this is a matter which you brought to the attention of the White House, and it's now being looked at by to see whether there were what the actions were. As far as I know, so far, there was no illegal action, but our examination of the matter is not completed.
Mr. President, without regard to your experiences in Mexico, do you consider that progress has been made in enlisting the cooperation of the Latin American countries in handling the Cuban situation? And with specific regard to Mexico, do you feel that anything that occurred there has weakened your position or the organizations in any way?
Well, in answer to the last part, I would say no. And in answer to the former part, as you know, the action taken at Punta del Este indicated, I think, a general recognition that Marxist-Leninism was incompatible with the hemispheric system.
Mr. President, the Armed Services Committee has not scheduled any hearings on your request for $460 million for a big fallout shelter program. And apparently they've had no prodding from you. My question is, do you expect to renew your appeal for this program?
No, I have talked to the responsible officials involved. I hope the hearings are held. I hope they can be held this month. I hope we'll secure the money we requested. As you know, within the last 10 days, I've sent up a supplemental appropriation request for around $35 million for the distribution of food throughout the country, which would be available in case of an attack. These matters have some rhythm. When the skies are clear, no one is interested. And suddenly then, when the clouds come and the And after all, we have no insurance that they will not come. Then everyone wonders why more hasn't been done about it. I think we ought to take the action on the recommended by the administration. It may be that there does not seem to appear to be a need as of today, but that doesn't mean that there may not be need for it at a later date. And then everyone will wonder why wasn't more done. I think the time to do it is now. Under the program which we started some months ago, nearly 60 million shelters have been identified. We want to have food in them and other necessities, and I'm hopeful that the Congress will implement the program we've sent out.
Mr. President, the United States has reportedly invited Japan and other industrialized countries to invest in the building of plants in this country. Would you explain the thinking behind that, sir, and does it imply also that we are discouraging U.S. investment overseas in plants?
No, as you know, U.S. investment overseas has been very heavy. In fact, it has been one of the matters which have, of course, affect our balance of payments. Over the long run, it does not. Over the immediate run, it does. We are anxious to have others invest in the United States, and particularly to invest in those areas where there may be higher unemployment. So this program is being operated through the Department of Commerce. We've also attempted to speed up the number of tourists who come here. We want investment to come here. All these will affect our balance of payments, affect our employment. We don't want our capital merely to be invested outside the United States. We want foreign capital matching to come here, and that's the purpose of this program.
Mr. President, there are proposals to suspend the equal time requirements to permit major candidates for House and Senate and Governor to debate this year. Do you favor this?
Yes, I think I'd like to see the legislation, but I think the purpose as you describe it, I would favor it, yes.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
This morning Governor Welch of Indiana visited you about the conflict between the port and the Lake Michigan lakeshore area, and he was referred us to you about your comments on that. Did you give him any encouragement?
No, he explained the concern of Indiana, the effect on the jobs. As you know, there is a opposition to this proposal based on the effect it will have on the national park there. The Budget Bureau is having an analysis made tomorrow, at which I think Governor Welch and his representatives will attend. There will also be a White House representative there to hear that discussion, and then we will make a report, a recommendation to the Congress shortly.
Mr. President, sir, the Democrats in Michigan are hoping to invite you to a $1,000 a plate brunch for a select group of businessmen, with the understanding, which is rather interesting, that if the list is complete, about 40 men, the list will then be sent to the White House, whereupon you are to write them invitations for a meeting to discuss the government's relations with business. Would you care to comment on that idea, and whether this is something that might, or what this might do to the idea that the Democrats are not the party of business?
Well, I think that, let me say, I haven't heard of this brunch, and so that we have no plan. We are having luncheons in which businessmen and others will be invited, and doesn't cost any amount of money. I would think that the problem of political parties raising funds is a difficult one. I'm not familiar with this one. I don't think that I'll be able to participate in it, but I'm very concerned about the problem with which both parties have of the difficulty of raising funds to carry on campaigns. Now, in the last part, I agree the Democratic Party is not the party of business. There's an awful lot of businessmen who have supported the Democratic Party. I think its base is very broad, traditionally, includes wide spectrums of the American public, and does not confine itself to merely one section.
Mr. President, I believe you've been in office about 17 months now and still haven't signed that order against racial segregation in federal financed housing. Could you tell us when you do plan to sign that?
When I will announce it when we think it would be in a useful and appropriate time.
You will sign it before the end of your term.
I've said already that I would meet any commitments of that kind that I've made. Yes.
I
will point out that we've carried out a great many activities in the field of civil rights, executive action, and including action by the Department of Justice and others, and I will take actions as it appears that they will accomplish the result which we want to accomplish, which is providing equal opportunity. Yes?
Mr. President, you indicated that one of your prime interests in lessening tensions with the Soviet Union. I believe Mr. Khrushchev in Radio Moscow indicated in the last few days that they think Mr. McNamara's Ann Arbor speech enunciating a counterforce document was an aggressive policy. Do you see any conflict between the two?
I think Mr. McNamara's speech was an attempt to explain why the United States opposed the idea of expanding national deterrence. He was devoting himself to that. That was his purpose, to try to explain and put theory behind the practice of American policy, which is to discourage the expansion of national deterrence as not as inimical to the cause of peace. So that I regarded it in that sense as constructive, and if read from that point of view, I would hope that others would regard it so. Yeah.
Mr. President, the name of Robert Weaver has frequently been mentioned as possible successor to Secretary Ribikoff, who has announced he'll resign in a week or so as Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. Could you tell us what your plans are to fill that post?
No, not until the Secretary resigns.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Two related questions on the economy. Could you spell out a little bit the formula that you will use to make the decision whether you will ask a tax cut this year or not? And secondly, did Mr. Heller's observations in Europe as to the remarkable status of their prosperity draw you in any way further toward being convinced that deficit spending is a good idea in terms of our own problem?
No, well, I think I explained in the previous address at New Haven about my view that the budget should be, of course, at times when there is a strong inflationary pressure in the economy, that we should pursue a different budgetary policy than we do at a time when the economy is sluggish. Because if the economy remains sluggish, you have the deficit anyway. Witness the 58 deficit of $12 billion because of a drop in earning power and a drop, therefore, in tax revenues. In addition, as the International Bank at Basel pointed out, there will be times when you will want to run a deficit budget policy and a higher interest rate policy in order to protect your goal. So that these fine judgments have to be made. Now, as to the first part of your question, we will look at the indicators, the sort of basic indicators, which have had some historical significance as in previous years as indicating a prognosis for the economy. In addition, we are going to come out next week with the tax depreciation schedule, which is now in the printers. We are hopeful we'll get action on our tax credit bill. We're hopeful we'll get action on the public works bill. Some of the other programs which we've talked about, the tax power, set-aside tax power, all these could affect our judgment as to whether we should go to the Congress this year. But the basic question will be to try to make an analysis as to the health of the economy over the next months and whether 63 is the appropriate time or now. Yes, Ms. Scally?
President, Premier Khrushchev said yesterday that in his view there had been some progress in settling the Berlin problem, and in a speech later on in the day he said the time for decision seemed to be at hand. Do you agree?
Well, I think we should continue to examine whether we can reach an accord on a matter in which we have powerful interests and on which we do not see alike. So it's a very difficult negotiation. Mr. Dobrynin, the Secretary, spoke just before the Secretary's visit. I'm sure they will be meeting shortly again.
President. Sir, in line with your communique in Mexico, I wonder if you think there will be a solution soon on the Chamazal zone in El Paso, and if you think this will mean a dividing up of the property between the two countries, or what are your personal views?
As you know, there have been long negotiations about the Chamazal, which this territory was awarded to Mexico in the arbitration award of 1911, but the United States did not accept it. Since then, as a result of the United States' failure to accept the arbitration, Mexico has been unwilling to take any other matter into arbitration, which is, of course, therefore lessened the harmony between the two countries. We're anxious to see if this matter could be disposed of. The difficulty is that since 1911, there have been schools, a lot of people moved in there, and you have a different situation in the area involved than you did in 1911 because of the interests which have built up there. That's what's made it so difficult to solve. But what we indicated was our strong desire to reach an accord on this matter, which we're going to attempt to do, taking into account the problem which is now there in El Paso and the interests of the people who are involved and the interests of the Mexican government. But it's a matter that we cannot afford to continue to treat with some indifference because the United States failed after agreeing to arbitration, then backed down and did not accept the award.
This is, sir, this is somewhat related to an earlier question. The other day, General Eisenhower described the Republican Party as the party of business. Now, if you consider this fair or accurate as to the Republican Party or the business community?
Well, I think that, as I say, I dislike disagreeing with President Eisenhower, so I won't in this case.
Mr. President, last week I believe you indicated that you'd like to have a somewhat better Congress, and you hinted that you would campaign this fall for that purpose. Does that mean, perchance, that you might campaign only for those Democrats who've supported the major part of your programs, or will you campaign for all Democrats who want you?
Well, I suppose that you've answered the question. Those who want me to campaign for them are people who have generally supported a major part of the program, so I don't think we're going to have a problem.
Mr. President, concerning the Medicare bill, would you elaborate on why you don't favor inclusion of doctors' fees? Is it a matter of legislative strategy or of philosophy?
I think that the doctors are very strong against being included. They feel that this would involve the government in the doctor-patient relationship, and therefore we have concentrated our efforts in attempting to assist people to pay their bills, hospital bills, and quite obviously if they find that eased, they'll be in a better position to work out their relationship with their doctors. It is because we have not included doctors that I've found it very difficult to understand why the American Medical Association has found this legislation so unsatisfactory. It does not involve them directly. It involves the payment of hospital bills. And in view of the fact that the federal government participates in the construction of hospitals through the Hill-Burton Act, from which doctors benefit in their practice, I've found the AMA's extreme hostility to this bill somewhat incomprehensible.
President,
yes.
there have been a great many dope stories on the matter of a NATO or European nuclear force and America's attitude towards it. There's so much so that some of us, at least, are a little hazy as to what the real situation is. Can you give us an up-to-the-minute statement on America's attitude towards the building of such a force and how far we would go to help them build it, including also whether we favor a truly independent European nuclear force, that is, one not subject to the United States veto?
Well, the United States government feels that the present arrangement under NATO gives full and sufficient guarantees for the integrity of Europe. It places special responsibilities upon the United States, but I think the United States in the last 17 years has indicated its determination to meet its commitments and to implement its responsibilities. But of course, as time passes, Europeans become increasingly concerned, particularly as the Soviet Union has developed not only atomic power, but also missiles, which put Europe directly under the gun, as well as the United States. Therefore, stronger pressures have arisen in Europe for a European nuclear force, not as dependent upon the United States as the present one. What we have suggested is that this is a matter that Europe should consider carefully, that we would, of course, be responsive to any alternate arrangement that they wish to make, that we would examine it. We recognize their problem, but we think it's a matter in which Europe should come forward with some suggestions and not for the United States to attempt to impose its views, particularly as we regard the present arrangement as a secure one for Europe. But if Europe does not agree with that, and she may not, particularly as she develops this additional union, then we'd be prepared to discuss an alternate arrangement. But so far, no such proposal has come forward.
Mr. President.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Governor Brown's coming in to see you this afternoon. I was wondering if you have any advice for him on his contest with Mr. Nixon and what your overall view might be of the campaign in California with 8 new seats and all.
No, I saw Mrs. Brown is here. I don't know whether this has helped give her any advice. And I would not advise Governor Brown. I think this is a matter for the people of California. He seems to be doing very well. He was running very far behind at the beginning in polls, and now he's leading in the polls by substantially more than I led at the end of the election. So I will be glad I want to see Governor Brown on matters which involve the interests of California, but on how we should conduct the campaign and all the rest, he's much better judge of that than I am. I think he carried California by 1 million votes the last time he ran, or very close to it, so I think he knows more about California and how to run than I do. Yes,
Mr. President, if you'll support Democratic candidates who ask for your help, does that include the primaries as well as the election? And what is your view of the man you're going to finally end up supporting in Massachusetts?
No, I'm not planning to get involved in any more primaries any place.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.